So thank you, David, for a fabulous, fabulous 3 assessment workshops. They were really, I think they do what we say they're going to do. They are a paradigm shift for our grantees. So I just had a few questions to ask you that I hope that for even those who don't attend the workshops might have some takeaways. So what would you say are the most common challenges you see nonprofits struggling with right now?
Well, you know, in a way it's sort of obvious, but everybody's talking about money. I haven't sat down with a single nonprofit that isn't stressed about financial resources right now, because so many of their traditional sources have been affected. And the ones that have been used to getting state money or federal money, you know, they're just shaking their heads. And then that's more pressure on foundations whose assets have gone down. And then the wealthy individuals are getting bombarded from every direction. It's hard to get their attention. So I guess I'd start with finances. And then I'd also just mention that this question about time, sufficient time to have a coherent conversation about complicated choices is a huge challenge. Everybody is so busy, and so they have meetings that people can't get to. They have meetings that people get to, but they're working their BlackBerries under the table. And so it's these busy lives, and it's hard to get the level of clarity about what to do next that the economic stress requires.
So that's interesting, because it seems like that applies to some of the lessons that we learned today in the workshop on what to do. You were talking about the quadrants.
I was, you know, and you heard me mention that I think, in a way, if there's one suggestion that I think they could act on pretty quickly and should act on, is to understand this notion of quadrant 2 time, important but not urgent, and protect time for it, because otherwise it just doesn't happen. So literally, whether you use Q2 or as Covey does or not, the idea is to acknowledge that there are these important matters that you don't get to because you don't actually have to get to it to keep running the organization the next day. But they wait and they wait until people say, oh, we need a retreat, and then they have a big deal retreat, and those are usually very positive. But what I'm suggesting is that you get in a retreat-like mentality as part of your weekly experience of the organization, and just save a little amount of time for those matters that are important but not urgent.
So can I take that one step further and be real specific about the problem? Because if the problem is finances, which
Yes.
is a really big fire to put out, what might you suggest someone would work on while they're dealing with the finances, but what would be maybe a suggestion you would make for something they could work on that would be in the Q2 realm?
Well, you know, I remember I used to, when I was here at Dodge, when people were putting what I thought was undue emphasis on the fundraising, I used to say to them, just be sure you've got something worth raising the money for. And I feel like one thing I would do with the Q2 time is to say, are we absolutely clear about why we exist? Can we make a compelling case about why we exist? And can we actually figure out innovative ways to achieve our mission that give us a story to take to our grantee, to our donors, both former donors and potential new ones. So I think some of that whole fundraising stuff goes a lot better if you're going into it charged up with the kind of momentum that can come from enough time to make creative decisions.
And sort of frame out your stories that you want to tell too.
Frame it out. How are we going to tell it, and who are we going to tell it to? Of course, that always takes some time to figure out.
You said something really interesting today too, when you were talking about life cycles and the 4 legs that are holding up the table of your programs, the 4 legs of governance and financials and administrative systems and management. And at one point, you said you might have to lessen the weight of the
Oh, yeah.
tabletop.
Yeah. Well, you know, the more I use that metaphor, this is Susan Stevens' metaphor from in Nonprofit Life Cycles, the more I think it's really helpful. And that was the first time I've ever said that today, but I think it's true, is that what you're really looking for is a table where things are in alignment. And if you're trying to do too much, literally this tabletop of programs can be too heavy for the legs. And it's just so clear that if you don't have enough financial resources to do all the things you want to do, somebody needs to note that. And you need to say, maybe we can't do all those things right now. And again, I go back to the notion that I think the greatest case for building a donor base is to do what you do really well.
That's terrific. That's very helpful, I think. So, you mentioned a couple really terrific resources today during the workshop. Would you tell us some of those, your favorite resources for nonprofits right now?
You know, let's start with books.
Okay.
Okay? I mean, I'm going to be very old-fashioned here and say that books are a great resource. And for me, I talked today about Susan Stevens' Nonprofit Life Cycles book, and you provided copies. So that's, I guess I start there. I still love that book. I just think it's great. The book that I didn't talk about today, but I would put sort of right next to it, is the book Switch, where the subtitle is How to Change Things When Change is Hard. Most people go, where can I get that book? So I think Switch and its own metaphor of the rider and the elephant and the path is as elegant as that table metaphor. And then where would we go next? I suppose one of the ones that I mentioned, may have prompted your question, was that there's this relatively new literature about happiness and well-being in individuals that is starting to be applied to organizations. And the title that I had in mind there was this book called The Happiness Advantage, which is all about workplace. And it sort of, it takes the old idea that, well, if I just succeed, then I'll be happy. And it turns it on its head and says, you know what? If you figure out a way to be happy in your work, you're likely to succeed. And I think that's true on an organizational level as well as a personal level. And then as far as resources go, Wendy, you know, I think there's this huge new group of websites and blogs and the like, and I sort of surf around in that. I try to find things. I don't have specific ones to recommend right now, but I think that's the next frontier.
Just start
for resources.
tumbling.
Yeah.
Well, you did mention one metaphor that you did like in Blessed Unrest, and I think
did.
it's a nice one. I think you can sort of separate it out for our audience and sort of talk about community that way.
All right. Well, would you like me to just say what the metaphor is?
Yes, please.
You know, I mean, I'm well aware that as a former English teacher, I love metaphors, and I assume everybody else loves them. So I need to occasionally remind myself, maybe you should hold back on the metaphors. But in addition to the table and the rider and the elephant and the path, let's add this metaphor. This is from Blessed Unrest. And Paul Hawken says that right now we've got the largest social movement in the history of the world going on. It's almost revolutionary, but it's invisible because it's so fragmented. And what he says is there are literally millions of efforts from nonprofits and NGOs and government agencies and neighborhood, backyard, informal associations, you name it. And they all, in one way or another, are reacting to a deteriorating environmental, social, governmental situation. And they want the world to be safer and fairer and cleaner. And they're all working at it. And Hawkins' metaphor is this. He says they're all like antibodies in the human body that spring up in reaction to illness and stress. And as I was pointing out today, those antibodies actually they have an advantage, which is that they're part of a system called the immune system. And they're part of something where each antibody in itself doesn't need to do the whole job, but the whole immune system itself has some power. And for me, what the metaphor suggests is that if we could connect more of these efforts, then we start to have something that is a system that is pointing toward health. And I think all measures of health are interrelated, is that the world can get safer and cleaner and fairer, and that each one of those helps the other. And that the idea that Dodge has had for years of bringing grantees together, for me, is like connecting the antibodies. It's like creating this sort of system that's bigger than the sum of its parts because of the notion of a cumulative effect. So I love to think about that, about how really healthy nonprofit sector in New Jersey makes the whole state better, where all the boats rise, and that it's not a question of who's going to win and who's going to lose. They have to see it as they all need to win.
Thank you. All right, David, I don't think I'm going to ask all these. I'm just going to say, so who do you want to play you in the movie of your life?
Play me in the movie of my life? Well, did you see Moneyball?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, Brad Pitt is just waiting. He's been preparing himself to play me in the movie of my life.
Very good.
I'm complete. He's done Billy Bean. He was beautiful, and now he can do David Grant.
Grant.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.